court and the jury in this case heard evidence about gang affiliation, the motivation for this crime, but I think most specifically and most horrifically is the way this crime was carried out.
First up are Michael and Anthony Carpio, also known as the Carpio brothers. On April 24, 2013, Kevin Oriana, who was an 18-year-old West Valley occupational student, was playing handball on the Cleveland High School campus in Reseda when he was approached by the Carpio brothers. According to witnesses, they had challenged him to a gang rival, and when Kevin, who was not a member of any gangs, turned down the challenge, the Carpio brothers resorted to violence. The fight started with Michael arguing heatedly with Kevin. Then, all of a sudden, Anthony brought out a knife and brutally stabbed Kevin with it. Kevin was unable to defend himself and suffered multiple injuries. In fact, he was stabbed several times in his head and chest before the Carpio brothers fled the scene and escaped in a vehicle driven by Michelle Pineda. Kevin, on the other hand, was rushed to a nearby hospital, but his injuries were far too severe, and he had lost so much blood already, so he was pronounced dead shortly after he was taken in at the hospital. Not long after that, Michael and Anthony Carpio were apprehended and charged to court for second-degree murder. In court, they were both found guilty and will be spending most of their lives in jail. Michael was given a variable 15 years to a life sentence, and Anthony was given 16 years to a life sentence.
As a parent, we plan to dance at their wedding, celebrate a promotion, look forward to possible grandchildren. The last thought we would ever have is that we will have to plan their funeral.
However, they were both granted parole and will be eligible in 2028. Christopher Dean was a 33-year-old man who had only been a father for roughly 5 years before he was ruthlessly killed by merciless gang members Lockett Gibson, a 23-year-old gang member and also mastermind of the crime, as well as Cortez Clark, 21 years old, Green, Brooks, and Gibson. They had brutally battered Christopher for over an hour with a 2x4 and a crowbar and had sodomized him with a handle-like object before they shot him twice in the back of his head to ensure that he really died. After that, they carried and put his lifeless body inside the trunk of a car, where they dumped his body for 30 days and left it at a MARTA station in Atlanta. According to a Fulton County prosecutor, on the 17th of October 2016, Christopher Lockett had invited Christopher Dean to the home of Xavier Gibson and Orlando Gibson, who were 23 and 30 years old at the time.
The court and the jury in this case heard evidence about gang affiliation, the motivation for this crime, but I think most specifically and most horrifically is the way this crime was carried out.
They had lied to Dean about closing another drug deal with him, but had, instead, invited him to his own place of death. This was because Christopher Lockett had learned that Dean had once been a police witness in California, and he was afraid that Dean might someday testify against him in court. So, Lockett decided to play it safe by taking Dean's life. He connived with other members of his gang, and together, they came up with a plan to cruelly torture and kill Dean to prevent him from standing against them in the future. It was also intended to warn other gang members who may have or be considering working against the gang as police witnesses. During the court trial, the prosecutor claimed that Christopher Dean was putting his life together and was on the right track, and that he had found it very difficult to inform his family and children about the brutal death of their father. More than 2 years after Dean's death, the gang members were finally brought under the arm of the law and given life sentences after being found guilty of participation in criminal street gang activity and slaying felony, to mention a few. Lockett was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Cortez Clark was given 2 life sentences plus 5 years. Green was given a life sentence plus 3 years. And Brooks and Gibson were both given life sentences. Next up, we have Lee Manuel Rios from Texas, who was charged with the murder of 18-year-old Kenneth Lopez in March 2015. Kenneth's body was discovered some days after the murder on Dwight Street. He had been killed by infamous and cruel Hispanic gang members Lee Manuel Rios, 24 years old, and Jonathan Guevara, a 20-year-old. According to court reports, Lee Manuel Rios had quarreled with Kenneth Lopez and had invited the adolescent over so that they could resolve the issue, promising that he would make things right. Together, Rios and an unsuspecting Kenneth had taken a taxi to the place where Kenneth was going to be killed. Shortly after their arrival there, Rios took out a heavily loaded gun and fired 5 shots directly toward Kenneth Lopez. Two of these shots had penetrated Kenneth's head, one of them totally missed Kenneth, and the last two buried themselves in different parts of Kenneth's body. After the shooting, Lee Manuel Rios searched Kenneth Lopez's body and took away his weapon and fled the crime scene with it. However, he was apprehended only a short while after that, after an execution warrant had been filed against them, and when the police searched his apartment, they found 2 loaded guns, one of which supposedly belonged to Kenneth Lopez, as well as a digital scale, more than 10 grams of cocaine, packing supplies, and marijuana which had been packaged for sale. In addition to the murder accusation, Lee Manuel Rios was also accused of carrying cocaine with the intent of selling it, as well as having a high-capacity gun in his possession and improperly storing the gun with a child. You think you have heard it all? Wait till you hear about the brutal killing of Simone Duran by 3 nefarious gang members. But before that, let's talk about the escapades of Lisandro Posada Vasquez and 4 other members of the MS-13 gang. Raymond Wood was a 17-year-old boy who had been lured into selling marijuana and then drove him from Lynchburg to Bedford County, where they knocked him unconscious, strangled him, repeatedly stabbed him with a knife, and amputated his right hand. Lisandro pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, abduction for financial gain, and participating in the gang, so he was given a life sentence for murder and an additional 10-year term for participating in a gang. 2 of his accomplices were also sentenced to life imprisonment, and the other 2 received long prison sentences after they were found guilty of murder. Despite pleading guilty, however, Lisandro Posada Vasquez maintained a defiant stance throughout his trial and showed no remorse for his actions. Finally, and even more ruthlessly, we have the insane and gruesome murder of Simone Duran, a 28-year-old lady at the time of her death. Duran had picked out Alonzo Quintana as a suspect in an attempted murder case from a lineup of suspects and police officers. Little did she know that she had just put her life on the line because Alonzo wanted revenge, and he was bound to get it. Alonzo booked a room in a motel, lured Duran into the room, abducted her, and snuffed the life out of her. He shot her numerous times before executing her. Then his accomplices, Abel Gallegos and Rene Rosales, poured gasoline on her corpse, lit a fire on her lifeless body, and burnt it to ashes. They were brought to book shortly after that and charged to court with over 30 witnesses to testify against them and an abundance of evidence. With all these combined, it only took the court a short time to decide the fate of the criminals. Rene Rosales, who had previously been found guilty of 6 felonies, was given a prison term of more than 120 years. Alonzo Quintana, the mastermind, got a life sentence, and Abel Gallegos was found guilty of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence, and a dead person's body, amongst others. Was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 163 years imprisonment. Yet none of these 3 criminals showed any remorse for their actions. You must have noticed that the reactions of these gang members were varied and sometimes unexpected. Well, whatever their reactions, it is clear that their choices and actions have consequences, and they will have to live with the results of their decisions for the rest of their lives. Would you agree that we can learn from their mistakes and make better choices for ourselves and our communities?